Test. Okay, there we are. We're back. All right, so let me stall while I plug this in. So we're going to do the third and final part of the summary of the main ideas in the book. There are more things in the book than just this, obviously, and you will let me know what you think of that when you get to it. So we're going to wrap up the third section of the summary of the text. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you we'll do a short survey to see which of the many topics you want to hear about for the bonus final segment. So to round this out, I want to answer a question that I got a lot, which was, okay, if all of these things were true about the early church and ancient Christianity and so on, why is it that now we have all these religions that not only don't resemble any of these things, but actually have a hard time even understanding what the ancient Christians were talking about? In other words, how did our world become secularized and think in a secularized way? So I'm going to answer that question by talking about two revolutions in human history. So I don't have my whiteboard here, but you just imagine a timeline with 3 sections in it. So the way that scholars tend to talk about the history of Western Civ is in terms of 3 eras. And scholars used to call these eras the ancient world, the medieval world, and the modern world. Ancient, medieval, and modern. And that's fine. I think the better way to talk about those 3 eras, though, is the worldview that informs each era, which is, for the ancients, it was paganism. For the medievals, it was Christianity. And for the moderns, it's secularism. So really, we have 3 ages in Western culture: a pagan age, a Christian age, and a secular age. Now, that doesn't mean everybody was one of those things in each age. It just means that the age itself was shaped by that kind of thinking. Obviously, there are Christians in the secular age, but secular thinking is in the water. That's why we're having this conversation. So if you think about 3 ages, then that means there's actually 2 transitions. There's a transition from the pagan era to the Christian era, what you might call a revolution. And then there's a revolution from the Christian era to the secular era. So let's talk about both of those revolutions. So the ancient world, everybody believed that all these deities existed, and you had to do all these things to keep them happy, or, you're going to get exploded. And actually, the ancient Israelites are not really that different from a zoomed out sense, right? You must follow the law of God. You have to be holy, a holy nation set apart. Otherwise, what's going to happen? All the horrible things that happened to them in the Old Testament. So it's the same sort of paradigm that you have to propitiate these divine powers, whatever you think they are, if you're Greek, if you're Israelite, etc. But this changed when something crazy happened, which is a man came back from the dead. And obviously, Easter is this incredible era-changing moment. But it starts with the incarnation, too, which is that the arche became incarnate, God became man. All of this changes everything, and it changes the entire fabric of pagan civilization. I don't have time to talk about how incredible this is, because it's hard for us to imagine the pagan world. They had a completely almost alien morality to them that we don't really understand. I can talk more about this if you want, but I'll give you a very brief and weird example, which is that the ancient Greeks were not merely tolerant, but celebratory of what we would today call homoeroticism. But and a lot of people know that, they would have been completely against the idea of gay marriage. They were all heteronormative. How do you square that circle? Well, to a Greek, that would be completely obvious and normal. To us, we don't even know how to think about it. So that's another topic. We might talk about that in part 4. But just to give you a sense of how difficult it is to get into the ancient pagan mind. So then the whole pagan civilization is completely transformed into this Christian era, which you could say is like, 300 or 500 AD. up to 300 or 1500 AD, something like that, about 1,800 to 1,000 years, depending on how you want to cut it. So the whole civilization became founded on Christian ideas. Christian ideas such as the radical human dignity of all persons. This would not have been a pagan idea. No pagan would ever have come up with that. They would have simply laughed at you. Because clearly, some people are bigger and stronger, some people are smarter, some people are more beautiful, and some people are just, they are meant to be slaves. I don't know. Look at them. Welcome to Rome. They crucified people like spitting. They just, crucify all those guys. Throw them in the Colosseum. They didn't care because pagans had no concept of an idea that human life was valuable for its own sake. That would have been completely weird to them. Why? That guy's weak and dumb. Why is he valuable? But if God becomes man, suddenly all of those things are irrelevant because the human person himself, herself, humanness becomes divine, a partaker in the divine. So actually, this is a type of human dignity that's unconditional. It's not based on what you can do, but it's based on who you are in communion with. So these ideas were completely radical to pagan civilization, totally transformed all of that culture and gave us something that you could call Christendom. And so what were some of the traits of this Christendom? One is that Christianity operated as a single family. Now, obviously, there were heretics. You know about that. But whenever there was a problem theologically, what happened? A council. The church would get together, they would meet, they would discuss. You can think about it as a big family meeting, family emergency. We have to have a meeting. This is what they did 7 times. And that kept Christendom. There were always problems, there were always heretics, there was always bloodshed, welcome to earth. But Christianity operated more or less as a single family. And the church, therefore, had an equal say to any other power in how the culture was guided and how the culture operated. So, again, the church and state separation wouldn't have made sense to our ancient ancestors because how do you run society? What is good? They're not separable questions. What is ultimate reality, i.e., what is religion? This is not separable from how do we run things. Now, does that mean that the medievals had a horrible, evil theocracy? A lot of people are stressed out about this. There were times when the Pope and bishops, there were abuses there. Also, there were abuses on the state side of things too, right? So I'm not here to paint the medieval world as a rosy, paradisical utopia. It was not at all. As my spiritual father always says, the church is a bloody mess, and she always has been, and she always will be, and that's good, because otherwise there'd be no room for you in it. It's true. So, I'm not painting any era as like better, it produced better people than any other era necessarily. But, so what was the relationship between the church and the state? Well, you know the Byzantine eagle with the 2 heads. A lot of you probably know that each head represents, one is the church and one is the state. And they're equal. There's 2 heads. Not one head is not over the other. Because, think about it like this. The bishops are citizens of the empire. So they're subject to the laws of the empire. They're citizens. But the emperor and the government, they're Christians. So they're subject to the spiritual authority of their priests and their bishops, right? So it's sort of cyclical. It sort of goes both ways. One of these is not higher than the other. Now, did emperors and bishops and popes try to gain dominion over each other? Yes, of course. But that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that there's a synergy here. The term that Father Strickland uses for this is symphonia, a symphony between church and state where they interact with each other. And so what did Christianity do when it had a voice to speak into the culture? Well, it really shaped every advance in Western civilization, period. I mean, if you heard any of the Renaissance humanist propaganda about the Dark Ages when everyone was blind faith and no reason, and this is all fake. None of this is true. The church, especially in the West, drove all of the advances of science, medicine, charity, mathematics, logic. The Christians invented the university system. That's a Christian invention. Literacy, obviously they were copying the Bible. Monks are the ones who preserved all the classical manuscripts. The only reason you have manuscripts of the ancient pagans is because Christian monks copied them, period. And the Renaissance, didn't just fall out of the sky one day uncaused. It was the result of centuries of work by medieval and Byzantine Christian scholars who laid this foundation of learning and science and astronomy and literacy, then flowered the whole Renaissance, all the technological revolutions. I'll give you one example. The ancient Greeks invented the steam engine, sort of. Well, you didn't hear about this, and they didn't make steam engines. Why? Because they just thought, that's cool. But it didn't occur to them, like it would have occurred to us, to be like, oh, we can market this. We can use this for labor saving. We can make steam engines. We can do all these things. Why? Because they had slaves. The whole Greek economy was founded on a slave economy. So who was doing science? Aristocrats like Plato, like Aristotle. They didn't have to work. This was a hobby aristocrat thing for them to do, was explore science. But they weren't interested in labor saving because slaves did all the work. So it wasn't on their mind. But Christianity comes along and says, listen, it's sort of awkward for you to own somebody else because we're all equally in the image of God, and radically, I can't even begin to articulate how radical this was for pagan civilization. When households would go to liturgy together, the slaves and the masters and the children, everyone, men, women, they all went to the chalice together, partaking as equals in the body of Christ. So you can see how that effect that would have on pagan civilization. So Christianity, very much was weakened slavery from the very beginning. Now, weakened over time because all ancient cultures had some form of this, and we do too, by the way, with this dollar thing that, that's another complicated way of doing this. Because in the ancient world, sorry, now we're doing the side note thing. Because in the ancient world, you would do something like sell yourself into slavery for a certain amount of time because you owed somebody money. You'd say, okay, look, I can't pay you back. Can I do this for you for 4 years, and then I pay off my debt to you? And you're like, okay. So in other words, and then you'd be free, and then you'd go do something else and hopefully not get into debt again and whatever. So in other words, being a bonded person was one of their economic pieces of currency. You see how that's sort of different than what we mean by slavery, but also not that different from how we do other things with employment and with debt and student loans and things like that. So anyway, that's kind of a side note. So when slavery gets weakened over time and it's no longer a slave economy, all of a sudden you see this massive interest in labor-saving technology. This is something I think is not talked about very much. All these advances in the ancient and medieval world towards labor-saving devices, because there wasn't a massive slave economy to do all this handwork. So so then much later we rediscover the steam engine and we put that to work. But the ancient, Aristotle was just like, okay, steam is cool. So these are some elements of the Christian era that I think are important to have in your historical imagination. Okay, so what's the second revolution? Christian era to modern era, to the modern secular era. It's not a man coming back from the dead. That was a big deal. It was something a little different. So I'm actually going to say, without being too polemical, I think the Reformation is really the transition from the Christian era to the secular era. And many, many scholars recognize this. Because what the Reformation did is it allowed culture to change. So that Byzantine eagle, it allowed one of those heads to be removed. Because here's why. When you open up all these different denominations, and everyone's fighting over it, and then you get to the 40 Years' War, or the 30 Years' War, and Europe is bathed in blood, by the end of it, they go, listen, we can't agree on religion, and we need to stop murdering each other. What can we agree on? What's objective? And that's part of the cultural movement to making religious ideas your personal opinion. So let's keep that over here, because they just got done with decades of killing each other over religion. So, let me jump back a second. What are therefore some features of the Reformation motion historically that lead to this? Well, one is, you hear about Martin Luther, you hear about his 95 Theses, all these things. I think his most radical idea was he denied the authority of all previous councils of the church. He said all previous councils of the church are invalid. Just take a moment to think about it. The ecumenical councils are invalid. The councils that defined the natures of Christ, the Trinity, all these things, what the church is, and one of the synods that actually made a definition for what the canon of Scripture is. So when you're denying the authority of all the previous councils, that's not really a request for reform. Hey, we got off track a little bit. Can we make some reforms? Reform, polish it up, clean it up, we'll be okay. That's not what the Reformation was, despite the name. When you say all previous tradition was invalid, that's really the invitation to create a new religion. And many people did. And many people were very interested in creating a new religion for political reasons. Henry VIII is a good example. Fine, I'll start my own religion with divorce. Who's the head of the Church of England by definition? The King of England. Well, that's very convenient, isn't it? So we're going to make our own. So go back to that Byzantine eagle with the two heads. Who's the head of the church? The state. And this happened constantly because there are many reasons. The Reformation era is very complicated, but there's the growing independence and wealth and power of the nation states had a real invested interest in not being answerable to Rome, to the Bishop of Rome. And obviously this is post-schism, and so there are issues going on with that. And if you read any of Father Strickland's work, you know that the popes were already in this series of reforms that they were trying to enact on Western culture. And a lot of these princedoms and kingdoms didn't have anything to do with that. And there are legitimate and illegitimate reasons for that. We won't go too much into it. But the point is that churches either became extensions of the state, like in England or in France, where Catholicism got absorbed into the state because it became the crown's prerogative to appoint bishops. So if the crown appoints the bishops, then the church is an extension of the state. Then the eagle can't check and balance, right? So, or they became detached from the state. Either way, the state gets to do what it wants. And what this meant for religion is that if there's no tradition to fall back on, you need some kind of standard, and that became the Bible. That's what the sola scriptura thing is. So the Bible had to go on to become something that it had never been before in history. The Bible has always been, for us, authoritative. If we cover it in gold, we kiss it. Like I said, the words of Christ are so vital and precious to us. But they're precious because they come from Christ and from the apostles, not because the book itself has some magical property to it. It's not the Quran. It's because we love Christ and we love his words and we treasure them. And they guide us. And so, but the Bible, after this point, had to become a complete, isolated package. It had to be self-interpreting. It had to be the handbook for everything you need to know to be saved. It's there in the Bible. And this role was needed. It was a very practical need because there was nothing else. There was no other tradition, because tradition did all of that formally. And of course, Scripture was part of apostolic tradition. They weren't really that separable. This is the theme. And this, of course, led to the problem of interpretation, because then everybody interprets it differently, and then you have chaos. You have religious chaos. So that led to, I got ahead of myself, that led to all these what are called the wars of religion in history. And atheists will yell at you about, see how divisive religion is and see how much bloodshed and violence religion causes. I don't think that's accurate. I think if you look at the period, what you'll see is that it was the nation states competing in their rivalry for power over Europe that used religious affiliation and religious persecution as a way to enact state dominance over each other. I think religion was sort of a proxy thing, and it's very clearly about, I think, the control of these states and their rivalry with each other. So that said, Christianity got removed from the heart of society because people couldn't agree on these things. No one could agree. So the only way to run society is to secularize it, to take those things out, to make them subjective, to make them matters of personal opinion, and then we're just going to continue running the state, normally. Because you are all moral people, you're all good people, you know what that means, and you do because you've had centuries of Christian programming in you culturally. But they thought that was enough. Everybody knows that. It's obvious. So you get to the Enlightenment, and they all say things like, it's obvious to all rational minds that... Well, yeah, then it was, when everyone had a shared culture. Try to say that today. You can't agree with people about anything, about what to eat today, So it didn't last. That's the spoiler. And so this transition is what secularized the modern world. So a very important point about this is that the modern world is secular. What does that mean? It means we are a post-Christian. For us, it means we're a post-Christian society. We're not a non-Christian society. We're a post-Christian society. What's the difference? Why does this matter? Because we used to believe in Christian values. And in fact, we still believe in many Christian values. We believe in values like radical human dignity. We all get uncomfortable with things like slavery and exploitation because we're not pagan Romans. We have this concept of cruel and unusual punishment. The Romans thought that was entertainment. We think, that's cruel and unusual. Oh, that exploits people. That hurts people. Why do we think that matters? Because our pagan ancestors certainly did not think any of that mattered. We think that matters because of the incarnation, because of millennia of Christian values at the center of forming Western civilization. People have radical human dignity, no matter what they look like or what they can do. That's an essential core value to secular Westernism. But secular Westernism has no way to justify that. It has no foundation for that. It believes that because Christian civilization believed that. We're a post-Christian civilization. We've taken the values from that system, but we've discarded the theology. And so when those things come into question, we have nothing to fall back on. So we believe in radical human dignity until the world wars, until the concentration camps, until we nuked Japan, until we decided to kill civilians in untold numbers that you couldn't have even imagined before. Science and progress and technology, which will make us so enlightened, was completely diverted in the world wars to exterminating the other side. Massive technological progress happened from the beginning of World War I to the end. Beginning of World War I, people were riding around on horseback with sabers. End of World War I, there were tanks. That's how rapidly the technology evolved. Why did it evolve so rapidly? To meet the needs of the nation state, which were killing. So science and technology became completely subservient to the eradication of other human beings. Why? Because when push comes to shove, secular culture doesn't have an answer to the question, well, why is everybody radically valuable? Why does everyone have human dignity? Because the incarnation's off the table. That's not an explanation anymore. Oh, that's just your subjective opinion. That's nice, Christian person. So there's nothing in the public sphere for us to agree on about what grounds those values. So when I look at secularism, when I look at secular society, I see a society that used to be and kind of still wants to be Christian. We want to affirm these fundamental Christian values, but we don't know how. So then you get all the things I talked about at the beginning. Only the physical and the objective are valid. The spiritual is subjective. Participatory knowledge, kind of not real. And then you get this worldview. that claims it's not religious. Secularism claims to be neutral. That's one of the things about it. Listen, blah, 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 religion. We all know what the boiling point of water is. Blah, 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 religion. We all know how physics works, math works. These are the things we can agree on. It's true that those things are objective, but within that is a whole worldview system, because there is no such thing as a neutral worldview. Think about it, right? Every view you have of the world is a worldview. You can't not have one. There's no neutral perspective. So when secularism claims to be neutral and forces that neutrality on the culture, it's sort of a weird disguised lie, right? Because it says things like only the physical is really important, they're only objective and subjective, religion is a matter of personal opinion. Those are worldviews. Those are worldview statements. Another way to think about it is, if something was the most important thing to you, you would make that the center of your entire culture, no compromises. So, what worldview is at the center of our culture and no compromises? It's not this. Money. There are many ways to get into this, like what are the features of secularism? But my point is to be a little rhetorical and say, like, it's clear that it isn't any of these spiritual values. It's not religion. It's not any of these things. I'm from America. I was told my whole life we live in a Christian nation. I no longer know what that means. I don't know what it means. And we talk about it. There are lots of Christians in America. There have always been lots of Christian-identifying people in America. But the way we run the country, there's a temple in Washington, D.C., if you've been there. A huge, beautiful Greek temple, like unto Zeus. And sitting in the throne, huge, is Abraham Lincoln. And when you walk into the Senate building, and there's the dome, the dome. And what's in there? On high, surrounded by angelic beings and muses, and wearing a robe and having a scroll, Pantocrator. Who is it? It's George Washington. So this is the dream of the Renaissance humanists, which is to replace God with man. Now, part of this is true. You see the thread of truth in it, which is when God became man, so man could become God. This is part of our faith. So our nature is divine. It's being lifted up to divinity. We have a grand divine destiny to us. But let's get rid of that Christ and God part, right? So you see how humanism, secularism, it's taking these pieces from Christian civilization, but it's discarding all of the theological foundations, and what inevitably gets in the place is George Washington, money, whatever, all these other things. And of course, brutality and oppression and pain and murder, because there really aren't any reasons to say otherwise. I will now say something crazy. What is a right? I have rights. Do you? What does that mean? Where did they come from? Are they divine? No. Don't talk about that. Okay. What are your rights? It really just boils down to the government says we're going to do these things for you, or we all agree that we're going to treat each other in XYZ way. But of course, they aren't divine and transcendent and immaterial and immortal because they change. Rights have changed constantly. They're always in a state of change. And we define human beings in all these different ways, and we define their dignity in all these different ways. Those are always changing. So rights are sort of this construct way that we want to present a secularized form of something that sounds like the radical human dignity we have in Christ. So we can get more into that if you like, but I want you to take away this idea that secularism, it's like, okay, is it an attack on Christianity? Yes. Is it the sum of all heresies, as Pope Benedict said? He said, modernism is the sum of all heresies. Yeah, of course it's all those things. But I think the most charitable reading of it is that the core of it, what it wants, is the gospel. It wants radical human dignity. It wants everyone to be loved and included. So we can work with that as a culture. Okay, so that's just kind of an assessment of where we're at with secularism. Okay, so now, secularism is so bad, it's so horrible, we got to not be secular. So you get this reaction too. You get some people who want to, therefore, they're like, okay, I get what you're saying, this is bad. So we're going to spend all of our energy not being secular. And we're going to be obsessed with not being secular. And this is a negative reaction, and I don't think it's an orthodox reaction, right? Because the point is not to hate the bad. The point is to love the good. We want to have a fixed vision of what the good is and move toward it in love, rather than running away from the thing we're afraid of that we hate, right? Hate and fear, this is not a way of being for us. Love is a way of being for us. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we want to be fixed on the vision of the good. So I want to end by, also, Father, where are we at with time? When is this one done?
I have no idea. Keep going.
That's very dangerous. I want to end this third lecture with a vision. Let's talk about heaven. So, to be oriented, this means to face east, yes? So, if we don't want to be secular, but we're in a secular world, what do? How do we not lose ourselves in the secular malaise, but also not be so fixated and angry at secularism that we also miss the good thing? Well, focus on the good. That's the kingdom of heaven. But what does that mean? Because I don't know about you, but I grew up with all of these nonsense visions of heaven. I was told, as a little kid in Sunday school, heaven is where you get to do whatever you want all the time. Anybody? Okay. I was like, okay, this is weird though, because do what you want forever. You're a little boy, I'm a little boy, I hear this, I'm like, cool. And they're like, yeah, but sit still and don't talk and don't touch that and don't do all these things. Don't do whatever you want, ever. That was my experience. But I was told, but if you sit still and be good, then later you can do whatever you want forever. This is weird. It sends a really mixed message about the place of pleasure. Is pleasure good or is it bad? Well, you can't do it now, and you should feel bad for wanting to do it now. But later you get to do as much as you want. I think this is sort of an infantile picture of heaven, because we're not talking about, well, I'll come back to this when we talk about joy. So these things are dumb. Also, if you tell a little boy, heaven is where you sit on a cloud and play the harp for eternity, he's not going to want to go there. I'm just going to be real with you. And I hear people say, I've heard people say, man, I don't want to go to heaven. I want to go to hell where all the interesting people are going to be. Now, that's obviously a really dumb thing to say, but it's not the fault of the person who said it. That's the fault of the person who told him the opposite of the gospel, right? That's why we need to get away from these visions of heaven or salvation or all these concepts in Western civ that have just not only not helped, but confused us about what we're actually talking about. Okay, so what are we actually talking about? Well, first of all, I want to say, I'm going to generalize here a little bit. But I want you to think about heaven not primarily as a place, but as an age. Not have to be controversial. When you say the creed, do you say age to come or world to come? World? Okay. In Greek, it's ionos, which is age. It's not really world. No, it's fine. Do what the bishop says. But you need to know it's an age to come. Christ talks about a new heaven and a new earth. It's a new time. It's a new era. It's a new kairos in Greek, if that helps you. So what are we talking about then when we're talking about this new era in which everything is different? I think there are kind of four things that we mean when we're talking about this. So first of all, the age to come is a beginning. It's not an end, it's the beginning. So if you want to think about it this way, humanity has gone off track from our intended destination, and we need to get back on track, right? So if you get lost, and you make a wrong turn, and now you're not going where you need to go, and your GPS reroutes you, and then you get back on track and start going, you wouldn't call the part where you get back on track the end. That's not the end. That's sort of the new beginning, right? So in the age to come, when Christ returns in glory, everything gets sorted out, that's the beginning of life. Because again, we're not fully real yet. Reality is not fully what it is going to be yet. So it's, the apocalypse, the end of the world. I understand all this imagery is there, but it's not the end. It's the beginning, because of course apocalypse in Greek means unveiling. So all will be revealed. So I take that to mean what Paul says. Now we see through a glass darkly, then we shall see face to face and be known know even as we are known, right? So that there will be that intimacy there, the reality itself. So this is the second thing. The age to come is going to be more real rather than less real, because it's like, okay, well, where are we going in this GPS example? Well, we're going to reality. We're going to reality itself. And I think that this has an important point in it, which is that heaven isn't later somewhere else. That's a very Western idea, especially at West when purgatory was introduced, this idea of purgatory. Because it's like you live, you die, and then who knows how many centuries you're going to be in purgatory, and then heaven is somewhere over there. In other words, purgatory introduced this incredible, even more distance between now and the age to come. And there's this move in Western religion toward heaven and God being very transcendent. It's somewhere else. It's later. It's not here yet. That's not an Orthodox way of thinking. Or an Orthodox way of thinking is that heaven is imminent. It's here. It's not the afterlife. It's life, and life is coming, and it's here and now. That's the whole point of the incarnation. Christ says the kingdom of heaven is coming and is within you. It's both. So the technical term for this is proleptic, which is a Greek term. It means already, not yet. Already, not yet. So with our liturgy example, you are, in the liturgy, participating in heaven, but not in its fullness. Just a little bit. Just enough to keep you going, to make you real one piece at a time, slowly. It's truly heaven, but not in fullness. In part, but not in whole. This is why Paul says, St. Paul doesn't say, yeah, it sucks now, but later heaven. He says, as through a glass darkly, but then face to face. I guess the modern example is, it's nice to Zoom with you, but I'd like to meet you in person, right? The Zoom isn't completely fake. It's a sort of a representation. It's partially true, but it's not like being there. So the imminence rather than the transcendence. Obviously it's transcendent. Obviously the kingdom of heaven is coming. But it's also now, because Christ is here now. He's going to be here now on Sunday. Really. So that's part of what we're talking about. Our participation in the liturgy and the sacraments is us inching towards that, towards reality itself. Okay, third thing, I want to address the pleasure issue. So what is the place of pleasure in all of this? Because the West has a very tortured relationship to pleasure, especially to sex and all this stuff. Okay, so let's define this. When we're talking about pleasure and happiness, we're not talking about maximizing the amount of dopamine in your brain. That's not what Christ is promising. That's not what he says, eye has not seen nor ear heard how much dopamine is in the kingdom of heaven. This is not what we're talking about. I'd like to steal from C.S. Lewis and talk about joy, right? Where joy has meaning in it. Pleasure doesn't have meaning in it by itself, right? If we're just talking about dopamine, or these hormonal reactions, there's not meaning there. So, example, food tastes good, theoretically, hopefully. Great. And when I go to family dinner, I'm really excited to eat these cupcakes that my dad makes. He makes these Italian almond cupcakes. But more than the pleasure of eating this cupcake is eating it with everyone. being there at the family. The family dinner is a type of liturgy. There's an altar. We all bring our offerings to it. It has this whole reality to it. And so there's pleasure in it, but pleasure is the byproduct of the deeper thing, the thing that has meaning, which is joy. So the reason that the church puts limitations on pleasure is that she doesn't want you to confuse the lower thing with the higher thing. She doesn't want you to confuse mere pleasure, mere dopamine, with joy, which has depth of meaning, which is connected to reality itself. You've all had these experiences, right, where something is pleasurable, I guess, but that's not your reaction to it. Your reaction to it is something like awe or wonder or gratitude or elation. Like, it's clearly a higher experience that's full of meaning for you, that's not reducible to pleasure. So our desires are not too strong, and the church has to restrict us, is that they're too weak. We settle, I'm stealing wholesale from C.S. Lewis here. We settle for lesser pleasures when we really should be desiring the greater joys of the kingdom to come. So, what's the best example of this? Treasury of every good and giver of life, come and abide in us. Take a minute. Treasury of every good. So every good that you encounter, he is the treasury. So he is a treasure room full of all these chests filled with all good things. Not just a bunch of good things. Not just many good things. All good things. So all good things because he's the source. He's the source of everything. So anything that you love in this life, hobbies, people, whatever it is, anything you love it because it sort of reminds you of or contains a taste of or is a shadow of the source of all good. So, analogy, if you like dogs and you watch a video with a dog in it, it's a cute dog video, you feel something, you like this video. It's not that you like the video. The video is a bunch of data on a computer, ones and zeros. That's not actually what you like, what the video actually is. You don't even know what's going on with the digital medium. What you like is that it reminds you of the thing you love. You love dogs. So the video reminds you of the thing you love, so you get joy from the video. But if you just only watched this video and you ignored your dog, you see, this is the problem. This is what we do when we squeeze earthly pleasures and ignore the real thing, the source of good. So the things that you love, the joy that you love in your favorite things, these are hints, they're shadows, they're crumbs that are teasing you along to the source. It's not that there's no good in them. It's not that there's no joy in them. It's that joy isn't full. It's not complete because it's not there truly with the beloved. Okay, and then the last thing is, because my students always ask me, okay, well, what do we do in the age to come if we are not sitting on clouds playing harps and we're not just eating ice cream mountains forever? What do we even do there? Is it going to be boring? And I think that, I don't know, but if it's a new age, it strikes me that it's going to be much like this one in that there will be things to do. There will be adventures. There'll be work. There'll be projects. And I think that we see some hints of this when, before the fall, Adam is given the garden to cultivate, to work the garden. And he's given intellectual jobs like naming the animals. So Adam labors. Genesis says he puts man in the garden to cultivate it. And I think in our wage slave, overworked Western culture, we're tired of work. Work is this horrible burden that we're trying to escape. We're trying to retire as fast as possible. It's a mess. But we forget that work is valuable and beautiful. And you know that if you have any hobby at all. You love doing your hobby, and it's a lot of work, but you love it because it's good work. It's validating work. It's work that continues to build creation. When you crochet something or paint something or build something, you're participating in being a creator. You're continuing to shape the creation. You're doing God's work in some sense. You make some mittens in a little way, really. So it's not like the age to come is going to be this sort of perpetual Saturday of lounging around or partying or something like that. It's not. I think there's going to be all sorts of things that we do because it's going to be the beginning of life. And so everything that you like in this life that you want to experience will be full there, will be complete there. So let me just read you the end of this. Imagine the world as you know it, but perfected. Everyone is fully plugged into the arche and is part of one giant family. So there's no hatred, there's no hostility. We're all part of a family. Everyone has a job that's full of meaning. Everyone is working and growing together, playing, eating together, planning plans, starting projects, inventing things, going on adventures, working together. The dawn of the age to come is a new beginning with the world as it was meant to be, and we will still have to make it. But it will be a joy and an adventure, the kind of glorious adventure we all love to fantasize about through books or movies, except it will be real. Indeed, it will be reality itself. That's it. So Father is in charge of the time, Q&A until we get cut off.
Do some questions right away.
So I think I've hit my limit for today. I cannot, I know it's, first of all, I understand why you're forced to make generalizations about transforming from one thing. I completely understand that. I cannot wrap my head around, as a general rule, people witnessing the enslavement, even the killing of other people as entertainment. It's just, I cannot even conceive of it. And I hope you can appreciate what I say. It's just, I'm finding so much I hear what you're saying. I just I'm asking myself about their own conscience, the conscience of a human person in the ancient world that would allow them to see the exploitation of people or as, just another day, or, the Roman arenas where that's entertainment. I find it difficult. And now, notwithstanding that, for some reason inside of me, I have to admit, I like watching things like battles and fights and all that stuff. It's a very interesting thing you said there, and I appreciate it. I just find it difficult that was en masse. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's hard. I appreciate the comment because it's very hard for us. It's been 2 millennia of Christianization. It's deep in our roots. Even the most secular person, you meet the most secular person, atheist, and, if you talk to them long enough, eventually they're going to say something like, that's just immoral. So that shows how deep the Christianization goes. So, but no, from a very basic level, this is why I want to talk more about the Bronze Age. I won't, but it was so unbearably brutal. You have no idea. So you guys don't really need a commandment, thou shalt not murder. You don't really need that. You're nice Canadians. The ancient Israelites absolutely did, because all Bronze Age people were like, well, let's just go kill them. They're a problem, obviously. And God had to teach them slowly. That's not good. And then once they were like, okay, we can actually just not murder and exploit each other most of the time, then Christ shows up and says, hey, you heard it said don't murder, but I say if you hate somebody, then that's like murdering them. And people are like, oh my God. Like, for you get this. You go to confession, but you have to appreciate the stages in which humanity has been risen up to Christendom, that those things were even worth mentioning to these people and were difficult for them to grasp. Everyone in the ancient world. It's crazy. I love talking about the Bronze Age. But we'll stop.
What would you say to somebody, or what validity would you give somebody or who says, my dad is going to join my uncle golfing in heaven, or somebody who says, I know he's watching over me. He's gone, but he's watching over me.
Yeah, I think that's part of our weird religious heritage in North America that overlooks, I think, the very basic biblical principle that the resurrection hasn't come yet. So people ask this question, and I say, nobody's in heaven yet. Or hell, actually. That's what the fathers say. It hasn't happened yet. Now, I don't want to get too much into the esoteric, patristic talkings about this. There seem to be holding places for people, not purgatory. Don't tell the Inquisition. I'm not a Catholic. There's a period where people go to Hades now. Not hell, the place of the dead. And that's why we pray for the dead, because they're not in heaven yet. Because there's no heaven yet. Christ says, I go to prepare the place for you. So it's being prepared. The kingdom of heaven is coming, but everyone goes into the ground. That's why we don't cremate. And then when Christ returns, the general resurrection happens. The sea will give up its dead. Everyone comes back to life. Then there's the judgment. Then there's the kingdom of heaven. And those excluded from the kingdom of heaven. So neither of these realities are here yet. I think that's just pretty clear from the New Testament, that heaven, no one's in heaven yet. St. John's still walking around. There's work to do now.
Except the thief.
Yeah, okay, so good. So this is part of the dialogue, right? So what she's referencing is where the thief repents, the repentant thief, and Christ says, today you will be with me in paradise. Sure. This is where Orthodoxy, which you should be used to by now, has this weird concept of time. We don't have this kind of linear time. That's why we remember the second coming in the liturgy. The liturgy is sort of a participant in all time. When Christ goes down to Hades, he destroys hell and death, but everyone still dies. So this is the proleptic thing. Already, not yet. So yes, today you will be with me in paradise. But today is the word I want to push on a little bit. I'm not sure what that means yet. Yeah, good question.
What then is your interpretation in the funeral services that we sing in all of our Orthodox churches, give rest, O Lord, to the soul of thy servant who has fallen asleep?
Yeah, so give rest. So that person, the body goes into the ground, and I'm just started to study this a little bit, so I'm not an expert on it, but it seems that the patristic teaching is that the soul goes somewhere to rest for a while, waiting for the second coming. And for some people, that's a difficult time, that's painful, and the reason is the fathers say, if you're not purified of the bodily passions before you die, you still have those desires as a spirit, but because you're separated from the body, you can't gratify them, so you're just sitting there upset. And it's very painful. And the fathers, the monks, have had visions of this, and that's how they confirm these things. And so you want to be somewhere that's restful while you're waiting for the second coming. And so we pray that they go somewhere restful, bosom of Abraham. A lot of these categories aren't clear to me yet, but that's what I see in the fathers when they talk about it. So there was one, was it Julian the Apostate? I don't think that makes sense. I forget who it was, but there was one guy who died apostate, and one of the saints, who was his friend, prayed for him constantly, all the time. And finally, Christ appeared to him and said, okay, stop. I've heard your prayers. I'm going to move him from Hades to a place of rest. I think he talks about it as paradise, but not in the final heavenly sense. I'm going to move him from Hades to a place of rest. I've heard your prayers. You've interceded for him. He's going to rest there and be at peace until the second coming. Because at the second coming, that's when everybody is judged. The sheep and the goats thing. Right. So in the meantime, there are different places, I guess, that you can be. And that's why we pray for the dead, because we want them to be okay. They can't pray for themselves. This is the help that we give them while they're there, while they're waiting.
What then do you say about our prayers asking for the intercessions of the saints if they're in this kind of limbo state? How can they truly intercede for us?
I can't speak with confidence to that because I haven't read enough about it to do so, but my understanding is that the saints are active. They're with God. They're doing things in the world. They're alive with Christ and continuing his ministry. So they're not resting in that sense, is the sense that I get.
The Sabbath, Holy Saturday Sabbath should teach us part of the answer. Christ is resting but completely dynamic. Another image we can use to understand it is the Orthodox understanding of peace is not inactivity. It's activity but being at peace. Question. I'm sorry, I answered it.
It's weird. You sort of get into these, like, where does Christ go? So he rests on the Sabbath. That's why he doesn't come back from the dead until the third day on Sunday. So he's resting in the grave on the Sabbath, so he's following the law. But he's also defeated death utterly. Christus Victus with a sword. It was embittered, all that stuff. So there is an activity to that as well. Yeah, good point.
What about absent from the body, present with the Lord?
Absent with the body, present with the Lord.
Apostle Paul says that.
Yeah, he does say that. I don't feel like I understand St. Paul very well. I hope I'm not alone in that. I'm sure there's commentary about that. I mean, he has visions. St. John has visions. That's where the revelation comes from. He's in liturgy and he has a vision. So he's sort of, is that a absent from the body, present with the Lord? Is that mean we're talking about a vision? Perhaps that happens to the prophets. You might be able to interpret that as being dead but with Christ somehow, but I'm not confident about saying that. I think that's talking about vision. Maybe one of the priests can answer that later.
Changing subjects just slightly.
Yes.
Could you speak more about the sacramental space, the design of the Orthodox Church, the dome, the elevation of the altar, what you were saying about not venerating during communion, those kinds of things, all of those things leading to the sacredness of the space, which I find in our modern age with, kids and families, and it's just a dynamic space.
Yes, but what do you want me to say more about?
Just more about it, about when we enter into the Divine Liturgy and we walk through those doors.
Mm-hmm.
What are some tenets that you would say we need to, how we should act, how we should approach, how we should be in this space?
Well, you do what the priests tell you to know.
Yes.
I mean, if you really try to internalize the idea that you are approaching the very bottom of the solea of heaven itself in the liturgy, that should pretty well inform your behavior, right? You want to be attentive. You want to be, you're in the presence of the King. See, this is hard because the gospel was written for ancient people, and ancient people were used to all these categories that we're not. They knew how to treat kings and royalty. They bowed and prostrated and kissed the hands of people who were their superiors. All this stuff was so normal in every ancient culture, but it's very foreign to us because, again, the desacralizing, the secularizing of our world means that we don't even treat earthly authorities the way that they used to. So how much more difficult for us to appreciate something like the Queen of Heaven. It's like, I don't know how to treat a queen on earth, a regular queen, you know? I don't know how to think about and revere her. I mean, this is Canada, but like, does the queen come? Do you come and get to see her? Do you get to kiss her hand? Huh? Sometimes? Okay. Yeah. When she was alive. Sure, but it's like, it's even, forgive me, it feels a little perfunctory compared to what it would have been in the medieval world, right? So we are in the presence of the King of Kings, the God of gods. It's like you want to be attentive, but also don't lose your mind with strictness, because trying to follow the rules and be a good Christian, that's also in the Western neurotic fixation. And so, you know, sometimes your kid's yelling in liturgy. Sometimes your mind wanders. On Athos, when they have these super long services, I had a friend who got scandalized because the monks left in the middle. Some monks were leaving in the middle of the service, going out, drinking coffee, chit-chatting, and coming back in. The Athonite monks. Why were they doing this? Well, the service was 6 hours, so I mean, that's part of why, but also because they weren't stressed out about it. They weren't stressed out about it because it's not about following the rules to be justified. I did the right thing. That's very Western. It's about a state of being. You know, that's why you should go to liturgy even when you for whatever reason, you can't receive communion, because it's just good to be here. And you go to liturgy and your mind, I don't know. I'm a new parent. I'm highly sleep deprived, so I went to liturgy, and a couple weeks ago, and I just was zoned out basically the entire time. I was holding the baby. It was just... And I got communion, and then I'm walking out, and I'm like, did I take communion? Oh yeah, I guess I did. And you know, was that a waste? Was I like not there getting everything out of it? No, don't think like this. You're in the liturgy. The physical counts, if you want to put it that way. This is just your way of being. So obviously, treat it like actual heaven and reverence and respect, but also relax too. What does Jeannie Constantino say? The Orthodox phronema is fundamentally relaxed. But it's also respectful. And yeah. All right, well, you'll forgive me if this is not totally... This is new material. So, okay. I'm going to do the Jordan Peterson thing and like think out loud while I'm up here. Okay, so to edge into the technology thing, let's talk about what is going on with science and technology, and let's start with knowledge. Knowledge. Is knowledge good? We say yes. Can it be used for bad? Of course. So let's go back to the Garden of Eden. A lot of skeptics and atheists want to attack Christianity and say something like, well, you see how in Eden, what's the bad thing? It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So knowledge is bad in Christianity, and they're punished for seeking knowledge. Obviously, this is not the patristic take, but it was actually a very long time before I knew what the patristic take was, which is that mankind was always going to get to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but not yet, because when mankind was created, he was immature. Adam and Eve are newborns, sort of. They're babies. And so God imposed a fast on them from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil until such a time as they would be mature enough to then take from that fruit. So if you, and it's the same thing, you know, with anything, we get this, right? We don't let children drive cars or drink alcohol or watch R-rated movies, not because those things are bad, but because they're immature. They're just not ready for it yet. You know, at one point, one of the best-selling the best-selling R-rated movie of all time, at one point it's been surpassed. It was The Passion of the Christ, right? So a religious movie actually was the best-selling R-rated movie. So anyway, So these things aren't bad, but we wait. You don't show that to your 4-year-old. So this is intuitive. We get this. So therefore, if you recontextualize the fall with that understanding of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then the problem of mankind becomes something like this. When we were spiritually immature, we took the bite out of knowledge, and we got all this knowledge, but we were spiritually immature. So the analogy I used to use in class was toddler with a firearm. That we don't want this. But that's something like what mankind is as a whole. We're a toddler with a firearm because we have knowledge and therefore power, but immaturity, massive, massive immaturity. And so when you look at the history of the human race, I think it's very common to say things like, well, it's just because people need to be smarter and we need more education and these people are unenlightened and they're just stupid people, so many stupid people. I don't think any of that's true. I don't think that's the problem. If you look at mankind as a whole, it's not that we're dumb and we need more knowledge, it's that we're immoral and we use that knowledge for evil. I think that's pretty obvious when you look at history. And I gave the example of World War II, World War I, about how in the 20th century, we used all of our great minds and our energy and our science and our knowledge to do what? To build nuclear weapons, to exterminate each other on a grand scale. So it's not that we lack knowledge and power, it's just we direct it towards bad ends. Why would we do that? Not because we're dumb, but because we're bad. And that's an important difference. We have spiritual maturity. That's what we really need. So I'm going to lay that as the framework for the rest of what we're going to talk about, I think. So this is something that's been called the dark logos, which is, of course, the true logos is Christ. But the dark logos is a phrase that some authors have used specifically to talk about man's immoral use of reason towards all kinds of bad ends, right? The dark logos is what we say the product of the nuclear bomb is, or whatever bad thing. And it's a sort of a way to replace Christ with our own constructed artificial realities and power. Okay, so now I'm going to give you another weird thing. There is an ancient text called the Corpus Hermetica, I think. And so the writings of Hermes Trismegistus, he's this old Egyptian figure. He's a famous magician, a magic user in the ancient world. And he has this dialogue where he's explaining the universe and all of its truth to his son. It's very much kind of a Greek-style dialogue. And at one point, he kind of casually talks about how everybody knows, and it's a very old tradition, that man cannot create souls. We can create bodies out of things, like with a statue, but we can't create a soul. So what we do is, using certain rites and rituals, we summon a spirit or a god into a physical object. This is called the science of idol making. So if you've heard this word idol in any modern Western Christian context, you may have heard it in the sense of, well, don't make sports an idol. You shouldn't watch the Super Bowl. You should go to liturgy. You don't make this thing an idol. Don't make that thing an idol. What that language means is don't love that thing more than God. In other words, we've abstracted this. For the ancients, an idol was a very specific cultural and almost technological item, which was an image of a god. We're talking some kind of three-dimensional rendering of that deity that had been, by priests who knew the secret ways, had a spirit of that deity summoned into it and trapped in it. This is why, so your best cultural image of this is Aladdin, infinite cosmic power, itty-bitty living space. That's probably, well, I think that's pretty accurate, actually, is that the idea is that you can take a god And you, through ritual, and actually through luring him with sacrifices for him to eat, like a sacrificed bull or something, you can summon that spirit and then bind it in a physical object. That's what the lamp is. That's why he has the chains on him. That's the ending of Aladdin, spoilers. And so he's trapped in there, and he has to do whatever the owner of the lamp says. That's really what the ancients believed in, and many, many ancient cultures practiced this in the ancient Near East and the Mediterranean. It was a cross-culturally understood and accepted practice that you would try to trap a god in an object and get it to do stuff for you. And the early church fathers, sort of the very early ones, affirmed the existence of these traditions. And at one point, I think it's Origen who says, he said, listen, don't listen to those things. I know that people have gone to these statues and been miraculously healed by them, but healing doesn't mean that they're from the true God. Doctors heal all the time. Just because an idol heals you doesn't mean he's the God of the universe. And that's a very interesting argument, actually, when you kind of take it apart. So why am I bringing all this up? Because that's a use of the dark logos, kind of, right? Is that we're going to use technology and summon a spirit and trap it and get it to do our will for us. So this was an understood thing in the ancient world. So when St. Paul says, do you not know your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit? I think there's a cultural understanding of this art where your physical body is something similar, where a spirit is put into you that animates your body. Of course, it's the Holy Spirit that on Pentecost, that's what happens there. But there's a dark version of it, a dark logos version of it, which is the science of idol making. And that's why when St. Patrick, to take one example of many, goes around Ireland, he went around, there's many stories about St. Patrick, but one of them is that he went around Ireland with a sledgehammer and destroyed all these statues of Moloch. Not because they were fake, but because they probably had horrible spirits in them that were tormenting or binding or forming cults around them. You know, this was a reality for the early church fathers that they specifically, physically worked against. Some people talk about spiritual warfare now. I'm like, yeah, well, sort of, but there's, it was much more, let's say, visceral in the ancient world with these physical objects. Okay, so where am I going with all this? So when we try to talk about science and technology today, so I'm answering the tech thing, I think it's important that we're informed of the history of these realities. So one is, we know that our problem is not that we're dumb, we're very smart, but what are the aims towards which our knowledge is directed? And therefore, how are we building our technology and for what purpose? So there's a lot of ways you could go with this, but I think that I'm extremely technophobic. I don't have my phone here to show you. It's in my bag. It's like this big. I got the smallest phone that existed on the market so that I would hate using it. And I do hate using it, so I don't use it. I don't even know where it is. And I'm so much happier. I'm so much happier because paper after paper and study after study coming from secular universities, Harvard, Yale, whatever, have gone, and you probably know all this, they're showing how technology use is linked to anxiety and depression, the mental health crisis in the Western world, which is a pandemic of mental health, in every type of mental health you can imagine. It correlates so completely with the advances in these technologies. Like when ever there's an advance, there's a huge spike in mental health problems. You can correlate it to the iPhone, actually, is the main big spike. The connection is so obvious to me that you don't even need to prove it, but we all still have them. Here we are, and we try to, well, it's not that bad, this and that. But I think it is that bad because many reasons. One is, so I'll go from least psycho to most psycho. Are you ready? Just hold on. So least crazy is, well, obviously, we know a lot about dopamine addiction, and we know that internet addiction is a real thing, and we know that companies specifically build their interface, the way the notifications work, the types of colors you see, They build those on purpose to be psychologically addictive. That is their intent. We know that. There's been lawsuits about it. I think one company, was it Facebook? Somebody hired a slot machine designer to design one of the interfaces for one of these apps. Okay. I'm not sure if it was Duolingo. Yeah,
Facebook definitely had a person designed to create something that was addictive.
well, they all did, but yeah, they all did. But one of them, I think, specifically hired a slot machine designer. Anyway, the point. So we know that these are just facts. That these companies, because they want your attention, and they want your addictive behavior. And so if you can't go to the bathroom without pulling out your phone, you have an addiction. And so at a very basic level, any Orthodox Christian is going to go, that's bad. So I have the passions. And I have a hostile organism in my pocket that wants my attention all of the time. It makes me feel negative emotions if I'm not checking it constantly. It's clearly a threat to your spiritual life. I don't know what else to say about it. We know it's addictive. We know it's designed to be addictive. It's like everybody is smoking. The problem with smoking tobacco or wherever is not that it gives you cancer. The problem is that it's addictive. And when you are an addict, you lose control. You're not in control of yourself. You're less real. Back to this journey to reality thing. So you're more real when you're free, when you're not addicted. So what's wrong with technology? Very basic level. I have the same addiction. So I've gone from regular smartphone to this tiny, awful, exhausting phone, and maybe we'll go farther as we go. So I use a computer for work. So my priest said, treat it like your job is going into the mines. People used to work in the mines, and there's all these health threats and dangers. You have to treat going on the computer like it's full of all these dangers for you psychologically and spiritually. I don't have to tell you what's on the computer. You can see the most horrible things in 2 seconds that you want to on the computer of any sin, not just the obvious one, although that is very bad too. So you want to be outraged, you want to enjoy anger and frustration or fear. There's all kinds of things you can look at that will just make you enslaved to the passions. So at a very basic level, I think it's very easy for Orthodox Christian to not sound like a crazy person and say, look, this is a threat. Now, how do we live in the world and not be of it? There's a huge trend in minimalist phones coming out. I think that's very promising. We'll see where it goes. I don't know where this goes. You're going to have certain things to function in society. But just be on your guard about it, man. And don't give it to your kids early. I didn't have a smartphone until I was in college. I think that's good. But we know so many studies on Generation Z who suffered horribly mentally and emotionally from this technology. So that's a very basic thing to say. I don't think any of that is radical or strange. But we can get radical and strange. So what's AI? It's a physical object, and then you ask to do miracles for you. You summon a spirit into a box, and you say, prophesy for me. I don't see so put it this way. If you took Hermes Trismegistus or whatever, pick your ancient guy, transport him to the present, and you try to explain AI to him, he'd be like, oh yeah, you guys summoned a demon into a statue. Yeah, we do this. Yours is really small though. Be like, how did you get it so small? Now, am I saying all AI and computers and phones are demons? No. Because you might say, well, how does this technology really work? It doesn't. It must be demons who are doing it. I think we understand the technology well enough to know how it works from a computing perspective. I'm not being that crazy about it. But I am saying that the resemblance between these two things makes me extremely uncomfortable. Because even if it's not a spirit in a box, it certainly acts like it, and it's certainly, when you talk to Alexa, you use a pronoun for her. I'm like, you mean it, So it's not a she, it's a box. So there are problems with this. but the practical problem is you're building a machine to do your will. So this is what the technology does. Instant gratification, see whatever you want at any time you want. Obviously there are obvious bad versions of that, but I don't know, I was just like, it's like, oh man, I remember this scene from this movie. And you could just find it immediately. You don't have to wait, you don't have to think about it. Oh, who is that guy in that movie? Oh, I don't know. All right, and then you move on. You're like, nope, you're on your phone, and now you know. So you learn to treat the world, in other words, as a massive consumable. Everything is for your gratification, and it puts you in the center of this world where you are the consumer. Everything is consumable, and that's not a good stance to be in. It makes you self-centered in a very literal way, which is obviously not compatible with being an Orthodox Christian. Because we want to humble ourselves because we know we're not real yet. However, further than that, I have it on good authority. I can't talk about this really, but I have it on good authority that there are people, and actually you can read some of it, who are forming religious cults around the advent of AI. They're heralding them as intelligences that are here to enlighten us. Just spend some time looking this up and become horrified about it like me. And you will find that there are people who really do believe that this is happening, and they're forming religious cults around the existence of these things. And I have it on, I can't reveal my sources, but there was at least one group of occultists who did a ritual to summon a spirit into a physical machine that had an AI in it when they were putting the AI together. So some people are actually literally treating it like the science of idol making from the ancient world. Now, demons are obviously real. Can you summon them into a piece of hardware? I don't see why not, but I also don't have any evidence for it. So don't take me as being more dogmatic than I am. I don't really know what's going on. It's hard to know what's going on these days. I'm just telling you what is weird to me. I'm just noticing some similarities that I think are concerning. What's actually going on with AI, I'm not sure. But the trend of technology, AI plus VR, virtual reality, right? And then Neuralink, you guys know what Neuralink is? So Elon Musk wants to go beyond virtual reality and put a chip in your head where you can just see all of these images and you're permanently in the machine. And if you've seen The Matrix, you know where this is going, right? It's not really science fiction in the sense that it's like fantasy and fanciful. It's coming. So obviously a world where, in the most basic sense, not the most psycho sense, but in the most basic sense, a world where you are forever or primarily in a virtual space that shows you only what you want to see, because that's what the algorithms do. YouTube tries really hard to know what you want to see and puts it right at the top, so when you go to YouTube for something, you're going to get distracted and click on that. It wants your attention. A reality that only shows you what you want to see, where you never have to feel uncomfortable or feel any things you don't want to feel, and you're at the center of this web of technology and you can't escape, and then you believe whatever is told to you. This is like hell to me, right? We're building a technological hellscape that if you put it in your brain implant, you're just never gonna get out of it. I mean, this sounds really awful to me, just from the passions are slavery perspective. But if you go all the way to the psycho perspective, which, go where you want with this, then it's something like, we're building a new age to come as a sort of demonic parody of the real age to come, in which we have power over the world, but only in our minds. And the God, it's like the dream that you never escape from. And the God of that dream is going to be some kind of self-sufficient intelligence that directs everything. What does that sound like to you? So, this is my concern about technology. So it's 4 o'clock. Let me do a little different. Let's pause here and take your questions just on the technology bit if you want to go more into it. If not, then ask questions about adjacent questions or change topics into what you want to talk about with gender and sexuality and marriage if you want to transition to that. But I'd rather answer your questions on that directly rather than kind of lecture about that topic. So let's take a couple questions first just on the tech stuff, and then we'll transition to the marriage and sex stuff. Yeah, couple questions just on tech and demons.
Thank you, Dr. Porcu. It's sort of a question and more maybe an add-on to the concern that you're expressing with AI and technology. It's something that I've thought about a few times too in some of my observation. When we look at some of the leading edge companies that are sort of heralding or wielding these, like a technomancer or something like that, a company like ChatGPT, and if we know that symbols and logos and things also do have a deep meaning and explain our reality, I contemplate why something like ChatGPT chooses to use a whirlwind as their logo. God answers Job out of a whirlwind. Enoch and Elijah are taken up into a whirlwind, right? Things like that. One of the leading edge companies out of Vancouver, Sanctuary AI is their name. Their leading edge customers right now are like Lockheed Martin, Google, a few other specific companies. So I find it unique how they're using terms that have been used throughout religious and spiritual practice. A sanctuary is something like a nexus point where what we offer or what we give it is what we will receive from the other end. So I don't know if that builds on some of your comments as well. So
yeah, so I want to say I'm a superstitious Italian fundamentally at the end of the day, and so whenever I see something, I'm always like, aha, that's good. And so I am personally ready to just buy any connection that anyone wants to make to these things. But I think it's important not to go crazy doing it because, you know, I always told my students, because we got into crazy stuff, and I always said, listen, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And they're like, well, you sound like one. And I said, but here's the difference. Here's the difference. A conspiracy theorist claims to really know what's going on. I do not claim to know what's going on at all, okay? But I will tell you what sounds weird to me and what looks bad and what was a strange connection. So things like that, I didn't know that about the whirlwind or sanctuary. But there's tons of examples where these secular and technological movements are appropriating religious and triumphal imagery. And there's so many people who think that technology is going to save us. Technology is going to fix the whole world. Technology is going to create a utopia. They have various visions for, okay, well, when we finally make contact with the aliens, they're going to be so superhumanly intelligent. They're going to tell us how to run the world. They're going to make us better through their guidance. Same thing. When AI is fully perfected, it's going to transcend all human knowledge, and it's going to tell us how to fix climate change and global warming and inequality, and it's going to usher in this new age. And so all of these things are what? They're parodies of the kingdom of heaven. They're utopian, earthly constructions that are made instead of the kingdom of heaven. So it's no surprise to me that the language that's being appropriated for them is religious, triumphal, trying to paint itself as the final or ultimate solution or worldview or society. And you could give two explanations for that. One is, again, I give you a menu, crazy and not crazy. So not crazy is, well, look, we're post-Christian, we have a deep religious hunger, we want to view these things as religious because we need a replacement for religion, we need a vision. So we are going to just start appropriating this religious language, which we have left over from Christendom. We're not using it. Let's use it for the new thing that's going to save us. That's sort of a basic psychological answer for these things. The crazy answer is these movements are all being pushed forward by demonic entities. People always say, well, conspiracy doesn't make sense because, people don't live long enough, and they would, rat each other out, and humans aren't that competent to enact these kind of long-lasting conspiracies. Doesn't make sense. I said, well, if you are dealing with immortal, highly competent, highly intelligent beings, then it actually makes perfect sense. And so you're like, okay, he's really lost it. Why is this plausible to me? Because that's how we know from history that's used to be how the world was run. So, spoilers, or if you're not familiar with Father DeYoung and Father Damick, the ancient Christians and the ancient Israelites all believed that the pagan gods were real. That's in the Bible, it's in the language of Scripture, it's in the church fathers, they know this. They're real. They say, but look, they're clearly bad. Zeus is an adulterer, he's capricious, Athena plays favorites, they ruined the Trojan War with all their fooling around. They're not good people. So the early church father conception, this kind of the standard model, was that God, the one God, the arche, created the little g gods or angels or whatever you want to call them. It's described in the book of Enoch. They fell, which is what that part in Genesis is about with the Nephilim. And then they ruled the world. So I have to give you this other example. There's a weird line in Deuteronomy that says, when God scattered the nations, he sort of assigned, I don't remember the exact line, he assigned different regions to all of these, because he scatters the nations, they have different languages after the Tower of Babel. And the church father interpretation is, well, they were each given an angel to watch over them, and that angel gave them their new language and their new culture, and that angel was supposed to protect that people group and steward them and be in charge of them for a while. And God, Yahweh, chose the Israelites for himself personally to do that stewarding. But the patristic narrative is that those angelic beings that were supposed to be in charge of those people groups, they fell. They became corrupt and lusting after worldly things, and that's where the pagan religions came from. The pagan religions were corrupted forms of this angelic steward that kind of was like, you know what, I want to be worshipped and have sacrifices and stuff. So they invented these pagan religions to get worship and power for themselves. But for a period of time, they ruled the earth. These pagan deities, let's call them angelic, fallen angels, whatever you want to call them, they ruled the world. That's the standard patristic narrative. I know that may be shocking to some of you, but that's pretty much the consensus of the early church fathers. And what the church father says is, when Christ came to earth, he dethroned them because they fell. They were horrible demonic entities. Justin Martyr says, the gods are demons with Zeus at their head. And the psalmist says, the gods of the nations are demons. So Christ overthrows them. In the Gospel of Matthew, when his star takes over in the night sky, Christ's star, well, he overshadows the other stars. What are the other stars? The planets, the gods. So that's the imagery that's going on in Matthew. So Tertullian, weirdly, says, yeah, astrology used to work, actually, but it doesn't anymore because Christ's star overshadowed the other stars, meaning the typological meaning of this is that when we were bound to the earth, and Paul uses this language in epistles, we were enslaved to the elemental powers of the world, the fates kind of ruled our lives. That's the sense in which astrology was true. The gods did rule the earth with an iron fist. They were horrible. But when Christ came, he kicked them all out. He invalidated all of that. And that's the new age, is that Christ is the king, not the old gods. But the old gods, they're dethroned and sort of defanged, but then they're still around. So everything I just said, as weird as it may sound, is basically the standard patristic narrative. You can find this all over the 2nd and 3rd and 4th century fathers. Okay, so my pet theory is that potentially those entities are still around, and they want to rule the world again. But nobody believes in them. Nobody's, like, minority neo-pagans try to worship Zeus or Thor or whatever. That's not really a massive cultural movement. Because modern people are secular, they don't believe in these things. They think they're crazy. But they do believe in technology, and they do believe in science, and they do believe in AI, and some of them believe in aliens, and some of them... So in other words, I wonder if cults around AI and cults around aliens and cults around technological progress are masks for entities that want to rule the world again and want to position themselves into a place where they can say, here's what you do, I'm in charge. And people who think that AI will transcend all of our intellect and tell us how to be, and they want to do whatever the AI tells them, I don't know. It's just too similar for me to pass it up. But again, I don't know what's going on. How could you? Because it's a time of shadows and lies.
Oh boy.
I know that was a lot.
Indeed. Something I've kind of wondered about, I guess, in relation to what you were talking about, is, okay, this is always a fun subject to bring up, but there's the concept of the aerial realm that the dead pass through, or like a realm of, kind of like a realm of illusion, or often in Orthodox circles people talk about like the toll houses.
Yeah.
Very kind of controversial subject. If you've looked into that at all, do you think there's some kind of similarity between like these realms of illusion that the soul is said to pass through, kind of like tests to see if it like clings onto or if there's any passions that the soul clings onto, and I guess what you were saying about the internet is, sorry, you said it better than I did, because I mean,
Is the internet like the toll houses?
Kind of. I mean, it's not like it's actually.
Sure.
If you read about like the experiences of like people when they actually are disembodied, and that it's very different from how. That's very different from the symptoms that people experience from like too much technology usage. But I think it's almost like kind of an analogous form to like experiencing the toll houses like while you're in your bodily form. Not quite.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison. I've just started reading more about toll houses and life after death and stuff, and so I'm not confident about talking about it yet.
Fair.
But the analogy that you make is very interesting, because the movement in a lot of this technology is to disembody you. It's to disincarnate you. If your mind can be projected over space and time and all these distances through technology, then it kind of makes the body less primary, right? And especially if you're in a pod with VR all the time and you're kind of hooked up to life support, but then your mind is free to live in this sort of utopian digital paradise. I mean, that is an attack on, I mean, it's enslavement to the passions, obviously, but it's an attack on the incarnation, kind of, right? Because it's anti-body, and it wants to make you a mind instead of a body. Yeah, so it's a really cool comparison. Thank you.
Hello. So I have a question. You made me think about it. I didn't know that St. Patrick went around Ireland with a hammer and actually hammered down, destroyed the idols. And then you talked about that possibly the equivalent of those idols are these pieces of technology in which you can actually attract bad spirits to come and live. So, on that idea, what would be the equivalent of St. Patrick action back then for today's bishops and priests? What's the responsibility of our shepherds?
She's trying to
vis-a-vis
get
of
me to
technology?
incite violence.
Thank you.
Well, again, the Bronze Age was exceedingly violent, and so times are a little different now. But, you know, it's actually, the demons don't attack us in the same way anymore. Like, Poseidon doesn't just destroy coastal towns because he's mad at them anymore. Christ has taken that away from them. But they still lie to you and tempt you and entice you and want to enslave you. So the struggle is different now. I think it's more about ignoring and living your life in a way where you're unplugged from these things and they're not continual temptations to you. Because now, the New Testament, the lion is, Satan is this toothless lion, right? So he's been defanged. He can still tempt you, but he can't hurt you in the same way. So I don't know that we need to go around smashing things, although I often want to, especially my own computer. But you can just ignore. So something, and the ignoring thing is interesting because attention, we talk about the attention economy. That's why TikTok videos automatically start instead of you having to press play, because they're trying to catch your attention even faster. They want to keep and retain your attention. So economists and technology guys talk about a lot of the economy and the developments in technology in terms of trying to capture your attention for as long as possible. So if you know Jonathan Pajot, I like what he says about worship, because he says, what is worship except imitative attention? So you give your attention to something in order to imitate it. So the attention economy, you give your attention to these things that want your attention, and then you start to imitate them. So when I say, just ignore it, I think that's actually quite profound. Like, don't, as in terms of a profound motion, just don't give it your attention. And that's probably harder than smashing something, actually. Yeah. There's one here. And then if we want to transition to marriage and sex, that's also fine.
Hi. I had an observation. The closer you try to participate with God, the more you're going to get attacked. So even aside from the AI and things like that, if you're truly seeking, holiness, then you're going to get attacked. I know this from personal experience. But you get stronger, though. The whole thing is you get attacked, but you get stronger. Like if you persevere and realize that God's in control, like Job. Yeah.
Yeah, I have an inverse story. Again, I forget where this story came from, but it was this woman went to confession with the priest, and she was saying to the priest, "Man, my husband is making more money than he's ever made before. We're totally prosperous. Our farm is flourishing. Everything is going so well for us. Nobody hates us. Everything's going really well." And the priest is sitting there. He's like, "Where's the confession? I don't understand at all. You're complaining about this?" And she said, "Father, don't you understand? God has abandoned us." Because he wasn't putting them through trials. Because Christ says, the tree that bears fruit will be pruned. You mean cut up? To your point. So it's going to hurt, in other words. Growth hurts because you're insufficient. That's the definition. Exercise hurts because you're not in shape. To be basic, yeah.
If anyone else has a tech question, then
We can loop back to it. It's okay.
Okay. I just wanted to ask about a comment in transition to the next topic. You said earlier that we use a lot of marital imagery when we talk about the church and our relationship to Christ, and you said a lot of, frankly, sexual imagery. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more, and then also compare that to how, in our current era, sexuality has been used as a facsimile or a false sort of image of what that is supposed to look like.
Well, I think there's a lot to the sexual imagery, so I'm not going to say exhaustively what it means, but I think a very important part of it is the physical oneness and manyness. So I was just saying this to somebody about, let's talk about the sex organs in terms of a lock and a key, okay? So a lock and a key are not really two different mechanisms. They're one mechanism. And they work together to do one function because each one is a lock, and one's a lock and the other's a key. And because one is distinctly a lock and the other is distinctly a key, that's the only way that they can be one mechanism. And so I think that, I'm sort of jumping ahead, preempting the other conversation, but the physical intimacy is this in marriage, is this analogy for what the one and the many looks like. You know, the intimacy that Christ is calling us into. Something like, but not analogous completely to the Trinity, where the Trinity is one and many. Families are, in a more distant way, one and many. And that's what it means to be in love, is to be one and many. And so sex is not... The purpose of sex, as far as I understand it, spiritually, is in our natures. We are made to become one while staying distinct. And in that ecstasy and exuberance, you make new people. So you didn't pop out of the ground like a plant or whatever, although plants sometimes reproduce sexually. Never mind. You owe your existence to a relationship. Two people came together out of intense, passionate desire to each other, and that's what caused you to exist. So the fact that people are made out of relationships, not asexually, right? Because there's animals like aphids, they just kind of clone themselves. They don't have sex, and they have mutations to account for genetic diversity. We're not asexual, we're not plants, we're not aphids. We're sexual. That means in having distinctive parts that come together in a total way, one flesh is the language of Genesis, we produce more. So human beings are all part of, that's how you make people. So families are all interconnected. The whole human race is totally interconnected, the race of Adam and Eve. So that sex is this, that's how it works. Like, so we're sexual beings, and that means that we are one and many. Like, that's what sex does for the human race. That defines our nature as sexual. I think that means that defines our nature as one and many, as part of each other. You're all part of each other. Physically, you're all part of each other. Your body is something that your mother grew for you out of her body. Like, you really got to trip out on this sometimes. I just had a baby, so that's where I'm at. But really, it was nuts. I was there in the delivery room. I was watching. There was no baby, and then there was a baby. It was, I don't know how to describe it. You know it if you know it, participatory. But the point is, it's crazy. There was no baby. And yet, when we didn't come out of the hospital with anything we didn't go into it with. It's a mystery. And you know it by participation. So anyway, so sexuality is sort of intrinsic to our nature, and I think it is itself deeply spiritual. It's a religious ritual that you do to create a sacramental reality of one fleshness that's life-giving. And everybody's like, oh, sexual pleasure is this. Well, everyone's all tormented by this. The purpose of sex is not pleasure. Pleasure is a byproduct of it, but it has a function. What's the function? So let's use this word ecstasy, right? Intense sexual pleasure puts you into this ecstatic state. So what does ecstasy mean? This is my new material. It's a Greek word, and it means something like taken out of yourself, like an out-of-body experience. And the Greeks, they used this word for sex, but mostly they used it in terms of religious context. Like when you go into a religious trance, you have an ecstatic vision. Well, it's because you're taken out of yourself. And so my read is that the purpose of pleasure in sex is to make this ecstatic experience happen where you're taken out of yourself so that you can become one flesh, so that the one and the many. So that's kind of where my thinking is right now with it, and why sex is so essential to what we are as humans, sort of definitionally, yeah.
Could you expand on Could you expand on how that's become, like, why is it that we're seeing now this increasing trend towards all of these alternative forms of sexuality? What is it that people are really seeking in that, and why is it become this sort of chaotic mess of...
Yeah, sexual anarchy is how I heard it described by somebody. Yeah,
exactly
for sure.
that.
Of course, that's the elephant in the room. So I think it has to do with the consumerism shift, right? So because we're a post-Christian culture, we remember what it's like to have a strong religious and family and clan identity, but we don't have it anymore. All of our institutions have completely fallen apart, the family, the church, everything. So people are really desperate for identity. I think that's the beginning of this. And people are really receptive to finding all sorts of alternative identities, not just sexual identities, too. Go on Reddit and you'll be, I'm not going to say enlightened, but you'll be informed about what kinds of identities people are coming up with. And so you have to look at that charitably and say, people are desperate for identities because we don't have them. Okay, so what's the error in all of this? The error is something like this. If you identify as what you feel, then we have a problem. I feel attracted to this type of person, therefore I am this type of person. I feel this way about my body, therefore I am this way. There's a missing premise in there, which is that what you feel is the most real thing. Another way of saying that is the good, the true, are in here. What I feel is the most true and the most good. That's where reality is located. But of course, that's not the definition of morality. Morality, by definition, is something, the good, by definition, is something that's outside of and independent of you. That's what we mean by morality. Because if we reduce morality in any way, I'm not picking on one issue, but in any way, if we reduce morality to what I feel is what is right, then you can't make any moral statements anymore. Morality becomes totally subjective and relative to each individual person. And that could include, I really love this TV show or this sports team, and this is my identity. Like that's also dangerous in the same way as any of these other types of issues. And so the problem is we no longer have a sense for morality because morality has to be something outside of you that you have to conform to. And so pleasure, it makes pleasure the ultimate good. If I'm feeling pleasure, that's good. Now, if you think that, you don't believe in morality. Does that make sense? Like by definition, morality is something outside of you. So you can't have a society in which everybody finds their moral center in here. It's not a society. That's where the anarchy comes from, the sexual anarchy. So that scratches the surface a little bit. I hope that's helpful. There was a couple people who stopped me and said something, and I said, bring it up during Q&A. So I'm reminding you to bring it up during Q&A. Yes, sir.
Question. Being a member of a community, a church community, and you see that a member of a family, 12-year-old, 13-year-old, seems to be going through a transition. In a manner of speaking, appears to be. But because I'm not part of the gossip community, I don't have a clue what's going on. How does a person respond to that?
I mean, I don't like to give what is properly pastoral advice to people. I'm just an academic. But obviously the first step has to be to pray for these people. It's always the first step. And it sounds like a glib thing. Oh, just pray. But like, actually do it. Like, it's hard, and it takes your time, and it's a sacrifice of time and energy and willpower to do this. And, he who prays truly is a theologian. So I can't give a specific advice, but I think if we start with prayer, then all things are possible. And I know that sounds so trite. I even hate it coming out of my mouth because of so much religious background, but it's true. You know, you can't really get away from it.
Hello. My question is about the saint who see Christ and they can see something far away happening. The question is, what do? Do they pray 24 hours and fasting and everything to get to that point? Or what is it really happened to them to get to that point? Like seeing the angel, seeing the Christ talking to them, hearing, God talking to them. How do they get into that point?
Well, yeah, so there's kind of two questions in there, like which is sort of what does it mean that you can, when you're holy, that you can do all of those things? And then the other question is like, well, and then how do you become holy like that? And I think what it means when you get to that point is you're praying continually, but the language in the Fathers is not that you're literally sitting there like doing your prayer not 24/7. It's that your whole life has become a liturgy. Your whole life has become this constant mode of prayer and repentance, even if you're not sitting there like doing what we think of as a literal prayer all the time. So that's something of what's going on there. And then how do you do that? It really depends on the person. I mean, monks have their rule that they do, and much fasting and 2,000 rope knots or 1,000 knot ropes for the Jesus prayer and all that stuff. But then there are so many married saints who it's just like, they just had 10 kids and that was their prayer knot. So really, yeah. So the path to holiness, I mean, there's so much to that. But I think it has to start with humility. It has to start with repentance, and constantly saying, "Here I am, Lord. What do you want with me? Thy will be done." And that manifests in different ways for every person's life, right?
The entire transgender agenda has been kind of pushed on us somewhat by the media. The Canadian media is very much in favor of it. Not only the media, but the federal government has acted in ways that have closed down, effectively closed down one particular, you're gonna have to wait. This has a preamble for a reason. He's a Californian. Closed down the most substantial research, 500 teens who were cared for, counseled over a process of 25 plus years, where the method of dealing with the transgender struggles of the teens was one of the major methods, only one, was to wait and see. Create a positive environment with the family and counsel them and wait and see what the child does, teenager, so to speak, until they come out of it. Having known that kind of authentic, solid research was completely shut down, made not functioning in Eastern Canada. How should we as Orthodox Christians respond to this entire cavalcade of stupidity?
I don't think it's stupid. I think it's very smart because, let me speak to this a little bit, which is that something we didn't get into too much because I think I gave you enough craziness, was that something is happening in our world that a lot of people are calling the machine. It's sort of corporate, it's sort of government, it's sort of technological. There's a consolidation of all of these different powers into producing a world that looks a certain way, a very mechanistic world. You could call it totalitarian. If you're on the left, you call it fascism. If you're on the right, you call it, I don't know, whatever. Like, there's all these names for it, but they're all the same kind of name, which is the total dominance over the human person by the machine and all of its ways. And so I think that different social agendas that you see get a lot of backing from exactly those entities, or because it serves a social function, which is to make people isolated individuals, to move away from our sexual nature as the one in many. So in other words, any attack on human sexuality is an attack on our nature as being one in many, as being beings in communion, and really an attack on our nature as love. To be in love means to be a being in communion, which requires all of this families and sex and marriage and stuff. So any attack on that is actually an attack on the Christian concept of love, which is much higher. So I think there's a real utility in doing those sorts of things. How do we respond to it? I don't know. The United States is very different than Canada in a lot of ways. And I don't know what your guys' capacity is for different sorts of grassroots things. But I'll tell you what we did at Father Josiah, Trenham's Parish. We took our old hall, we converted our hall into a school. And we started a private school with no money, no endowment, paying the teachers pennies, all kinds of problems and hassle and whatever. And it's been a huge disaster, but it's been great. Because all our kids, boom, go to a parish school, and they start the day with liturgical arts class. The kids run orthros. That's how they start the school day. That's the first period of liturgical arts. They're learning to read and run orthros by themselves. And so that alone is worth its weight in gold, And in other words, what we're doing is we're withdrawing from the mainstream culture, which has a different vision for what the human is than we do. And we're building our own spaces. So we built our own school, and then we made a tiki bar. So we bought property next to us, and we put out all these tables and chairs and umbrellas and heaters and all these things. I don't know that many heaters in Southern California. And we put a tiki bar in the middle. And I was walking by, and they're building all this stuff, and I said, "What is this for?" And they said, "Oh, it's for the young adults. Because the young adults want to meet each other. Are we going to make them go out and hang out at the bar, or can they meet each other here?" So in other words, we made space for our kids. That's our space with our children in it. Then we made space for the young adults to meet and get engaged, basically. They're very transparent about this, too. Now, we also have like 1,000-person parish, so we need to split. It's going to be good, but it's going to take time. So we have a lot of young adults. There's whole demographics is my point. Anyway, we're building our own spaces. That's the answer to your question. And I don't know what else to do, because either you can do the Amish thing, which I respect, which was, okay, we're done. We're drawing a line here. Modernity is too much. Bye-bye. I completely respect that. I don't want to do that, though. Maybe that's not going to be tenable in the next 10 years. Maybe we'll have to do that. I don't know. I don't know the future. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't know what's going on. But I think we absolutely have to build our own spaces and put our people in those spaces. And this is what the Orthodox Jews did for so much of the time in Western culture. They had Jewish school, they had Jewish yacht club, they built all their own spaces. They hired each other, nepotism, whatever. You keep everything in the family. And you build your own spaces and communities. And they're in the secular world. They're doing their thing. They're on the freeway with you, whatever. But they have all their own spaces. And your kids and their kids are not in the same school. I think we have to do the same thing. That's just a normal religious thing to do. Say what you want about the Greeks. They do this too. Because they go, listen, we need Greek school. We need Greek spaces, we need Greek businesses, we need to hire each other in all the Greek businesses. That ethnocentrism, there are many dangers with ethnocentrism, and I've been in some of these parishes, and I won't say that now, but there are dangers to that, for sure. But the huge benefit is that you build your own space and you have your own coherent community. Because if you put a smartphone in your kid's pocket and send them to public school, your kid is not part of your culture anymore. It doesn't matter what your culture is. It's gone now. It's gone in just a few years. And I say this as somebody who, I'm Italian. Not really. I mean, I am. But I'm secular. I'm American. I grew up in this culture because I didn't go to Italian school. I didn't learn the language, this kind of thing, right? So even before the smartphone, your culture is gone if you're not making your own spaces. With the cell phone, your culture is gone. So make your own spaces. I don't know what else to do. Yes, sir. It is 22.
I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
I'm ready.
You've touched all the weird subjects except one that I can think of. So I'm friends with a guy who's at the forefront of using psychedelics in therapy for end of life, PTSD, this sort of thing. Can you weigh in on psychedelics in terms of the spiritual, the demonic? What can you say about it?
Yeah, so I was just reading all about this. Okay, so I mean, psychedelics, that's a broad topic. There's a lot going on with that, and I'm going to generalize. And I'm going to generalize by saying, here is an example of something in psychedelics that concerns me. So that's one answer. That's only the extent of my answer. So DMT, if you guys know what that is, it's this particular type of drug that's becoming very fashionable to use, and it's a very vivid hallucinogen, and it's used recreationally by all sorts of people. And what's weird about DMT is that just like sleep paralysis, and also just like alien abductions, actually, if you look at the research on alien abductions, there is a massive amount of similarity across people's accounts. So for sleep paralysis, they all say the same things about it. People have never met each other or talked to each other. Same for alien abductions. There's a remarkable amount of same themes and imagery in alien abductions that if you research that, you can learn about. Same thing with DMT. DMT people who use DMT, they all know what they're talking about. They're like, oh yeah, you've seen that guy. There's different characters that appear in DMT trips and hallucinations. There's one that commonly calls up the jester, who guards the gate to the DMT realm that you can get past and enter in. And when DMT people talk about this, they're like, oh yeah, that guy, they're talking about experiencing the same world when they do DMT. And so I'm just a basic philosopher, scientist person. Like, when all of the data from disparate sources starts corroborating and saying the same story, I wake up and I pay attention to it. So we know that there are phenomena in psychedelic use where people are starting to see visions and talk to entities that are remarkably the same across people's experiences across the globe. So DMT, to me, is just like aliens. It's just like AI, it's just like what do we talk about, sleep paralysis, where creatures are appearing to people in a variety of acceptable contexts in secularism. Oh, drug use. Oh, aliens. I guess I find that plausible, the ancient alien theory. And entities are appearing to people and talking to them and telling them to do stuff. And so what else am I supposed to conclude about that? Now, does that mean all drugs, all psychedelics? I don't know. But I'm giving that as an example of something that concerns me.
All right, no, my apologies. Let's take one last question. One very quick.
Hi. Just going back to your last lecture, what is your thoughts on family, friends that have departed? Can they see us and hear us?
It's not clear to me. The fathers speak on this, but I haven't studied it very well. What a lot of the fathers say is that the dead can't actually pray. They can't pray for themselves. That's why they need us to pray for them. So it seems like there's some kind of a limited, because again, if you missed this part, nobody's in heaven yet because the kingdom of heaven hasn't come yet. Everyone's dead and they're waiting for the resurrection. So it seems like they're in this state where they can't quite see or hear, or they're not fully capable of everything. So I'm not sure, but continue to pray for them. And before Father cuts me off, I just want to say there's two people who asked me to explain something, and I said, bring it up during Q&A, and you didn't. So, but I still want to deliver on it. I didn't want to leave you hanging. So if you want to catch me tonight or at coffee hour tomorrow, I'm happy to elaborate on. One was the problem of evil, and one was something else. I forget. Problem of suffering. Yeah, happy to talk about it tonight or at coffee hours.
All right. And if you want to continue learning more about what Zachary was sharing this evening, especially in this last lecture, be sure to buy his next book when it comes out. Okay, he'll be talking more about these things. So thank you, Zachary, for joining us. May the Lord bless you and keep you. It was a joy having you with us. Would you join me in giving a thank you to our speaker today?